Okay, chapter 20, transfer of title. In this chapter, we're going to talk about the four methods of title transfer. We're going to explain the process of the transfer of title of a deceased person's property, how that works. So let's see. Title, we know, is just a word that means ownership, ownership of the land. Alienation is transfer of title to a parcel of real estate. And that can be done during someone's life or after their death. It can be done voluntary or it can be done involuntarily. At death, it's voluntarily through a will or involuntarily if there is no will, uh, because then the state will take your property uh, through the process of escheat when no heirs can be located and you died intestate without a will. So, title to real estate means the right to or ownership of the land. So, we're in chapter 20 right now. All right. And you should write here alienation, the transfer of title to a parcel of real estate. All right, voluntary alienation of title can be done by gift, sale, or exchange. The owners use some form of deed to convey that ownership during their lifetime, or by will if they want to transfer the ownership upon their death voluntarily, where they get to specify who gets it. Transfer of ownership to or from the government is done by dedication. You give land to the government for a public use, like streets, schools, or parks. This is often done by developers when they're doing subdivisions, or we had that one example in New York where they had that overpass that was connecting the two buildings. They may have dedicated the land below for use as a street to the city. Public grant is when governments give public land to an individual for private use. So anytime you change ownership, whether you're selling it or giving it away, you're granting that ownership to someone else. That's voluntary alienation. Public grant is when public property is given to a private individual. Dedication is when the private individual gives land to the government. So let's highlight voluntary alienation. Well, that's something that you wanted voluntary. Its transfer of title may be done by gift, sale, or exchange. To transfer title by voluntary alienation during your lifetime, an owner must use some form of deed of conveyance to convey that ownership interest. So, ownership of subdivided lands earmarked for streets and roads to a municipality are given to a municipality through the process known as dedication. Lands owned by the government may be transferred to individuals through public grant. Title to property can be transferred by involuntary alienation without the owner's consent. And when a person dies intestate and leaves no heirs, their real estate passes to the state by escheat. If there's no family that you dictated that to give it to, or no natural blood relatives that could lay claim to it. So,
Can you go back for a second, Victor, please?
sure.
Thank you.
So, dedication and public grant are two different words, or
Yep.
they're I mean, the meaning is similar, or it's like, so I took the air rights in those two buildings and gave the land to the to the government, or sell the land to the public to the
No, you
government.
give it, you give the land to the government.
It's
So
dedication. Okay.
yeah,
It's free of cost. Is it a
so
gift?
yeah. Often a developer does this when they're developing raw land. Say I want to create a condominium complex, so I buy a bunch of land, right? And or here, let me give you a different example. I want to build a complex of brand new homes. So I bought a bunch of raw land, and now I'm developing all these homes on that land. The I have to put a layout of how I'm going to subdivide that land, what the size of the lots are, the measurements of everything, and streets have to be built to get to the houses, right? Now, those streets are being built on private property land that I own as a developer. After I sell all the houses, why would I want to keep those streets in my ownership that I would then need to be maintaining and paying taxes on? There's no benefit for me on that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay out in my plans when I submit them to the city for development of my project that I'm going to dedicate these roads. That means I'm going to be giving them to the government and they'll become government streets. However, I'm allowed to name them because I'm the one that's building them initially, right? So I can name these roads and streets and circles or whatever you want to call it, ways, many other uh, things that you could call these uh, rights of way, these streets, these roads. All right. Um,
Yeah, that's a good example.
yeah.
Thank you.
And when the government gives land to a private individual, it's through public grant. Whether they're giving it to you or if they're selling it to you, they're granting that ownership of public property through public grant. They may have a lot. I'll give you an example on one of these other chapters that we're going to be getting into. Um, there, where I have a diagram of a listing that I had once, where it was a corner property, but actually it wasn't the corner property. It was the last house on the block before the corner. It was like it was one of these weird roads where it was a corner, and then there was a streets that came off at angles. Now, the house was the last property there right on the corner, and then there was a big empty grassy area. That was actually owned by the city, even though they were using it and they were cutting that grass there because the city never did for years. They had a volleyball net set up on it. So what they could do is they could ask the city to grant them the ownership of that. They'll pay taxes on it. They've already been maintaining it. Otherwise, they could say, City, we're sick of cutting the grass here. You need to come and cut your own grass on a regular basis. You know, so the city may say, "Yeah, well, we got really no use for this property. That's just going to be a pain in the neck for us. So we'll grant that ownership to this person. And they'll have a bigger piece of land too. And they're going to pay taxes on it. Right? So why not?
So if so the in this case the builder will say that I'm doing the voluntarily alienation to the government through dedication. Is that right?
Well, it is voluntary alienation, but you don't got to say that. You know, voluntary alienation just means that your land's not getting taken from you. You know, you're giving it to someone voluntarily. You know, but how do we give land to the government voluntarily? Through something that we
Through
call
dedication.
dedication. Hmm.
But
So all we say is, yeah, I want to dedicate this street to the city.
okay, okay.
And when a developer is doing it, they're doing it through their plans that they submit before they get the approval for their complex. They submit, hey, they have to specify the streets that are being built. Are they going to remain private or are they going to become, are they getting dedicated and the city's going to need to maintain them? City needs to know that. Okay. Now, involuntary alienation is something you don't want, like when you're getting foreclosed on or the land's getting taken from you for one reason or another, whether it's due to your non-payment of taxes or not paying a mortgage and you're getting foreclosed on. Uh, or some other reasons. The city needs to take your property because they're going to widen the road, or they're going to, you're near a highway, the land that you own, and they're going to put in one of those clover leaf turns, but so they need your property, and they're going to take it, tear down your house, and build just a road there. This happens, but they got to justly compensate you for the value of your land and your house. Can't just take it. And they do this when it's needed for greater public good. But sometimes, those eminent domain powers do get abused. All right, so when a person dies intestate, they leave no heirs. Title to their real estate passes to the state through that process of escheat, which we'll actually go through the full process of this at the end of this chapter. Can I change the slide now?
Yes.
Yes, please.
All right, so highlight this down here if you didn't already. You may have already highlighted this, so involuntary alienation is a transfer without the owner's consent, and this could be done by escheat through eminent domain, where they're taking your property. You didn't want to sell it; they're forcing you to sell it to the government. Due to unpaid debts like taxes, mortgage loans, or through foreclosure. By court action like a partition proceeding or suit to quiet title. Partition proceeding is in a partition proceeding, one co-owner seeks to force another to divide the property if possible, and if that's not possible, then they have to sell it. So one example of this is when you have two co-owners. Let's just say there's only two co-owners on a property. You and I, we buy a property together, and now I want to get out of the property because I want to move out of New Jersey, and I don't want to be tied down to New Jersey in any way. So I want to cash out on my investment. So could you buy me out? You wish you could, but you didn't have the money to buy me out. Okay, so then what are my options? Am I stuck owning this property with you? Well, I could try to sell my ownership interest to someone else if they want to become a partner with you. I could sell my ownership shares to someone else, but that could be difficult to do. So what are my options now? You can't buy me out, or you won't buy me out. It's tough for me to find someone that wants to buy only a partial ownership interest in a property that they'll become partners with you, a stranger to them. So what are my options? Am I stuck being an owner here? Well, no, I could take you to court and sue my co-owner, forcing you to sell the property. Well, first the court will see if it's possible that the property can be subdivided. And if that is not possible, then the court will order that the property is sold and the proceeds from the sale get split amongst us. So it's a form of involuntary alienation for you because you didn't want to sell. I did. But you couldn't buy me out for whatever reason or didn't want to. I couldn't find another buyer. I tried. So my only other option is to force you to sell so that I could cash out and get my money and be on my way. This is called a partition proceeding. All right. An action to quiet title requests that the court rule on a clouded or disputed title, canceling one claim in favor of another to show who is the rightful owner of the property. Let's just say that I was a squatter and I was squatting on your property for years. If I'm there for a long enough period of time, I could take you to court and claim ownership of it. So I would sue you, suit to quiet title. It's basically asking the judge to quiet the rumblings of one party who's claiming ownership in favor of another, for whatever the reasons may be. Adverse possession, that's that easement by prescription, must be perfected with a lawsuit for adverse possession, or a suit to quiet title, sometimes it's called, where that squatter that's been adversely in possession of your property for a period of time gives us the right to sue you to claim ownership of it. Some people refer to it as squatter's rights. Squatters have no rights. Let's clear that up. But if I'm there long enough and you didn't take any action to remove me, then I can claim ownership of the property. But I got to do it in the court of law. And there's certain rules and stuff that need to be followed for that. And then erosion is a decrease in land caused by the wearing away of the land by wind or water. Mother Nature, basically. That's involuntary. We didn't want to lose our land, but Mother Nature ripped it from us. All right, so that's also a form of involuntary alienation. All right, if we take a look at this chart, we have the action, the process, and who takes it. So a person dies intestate and no heirs can be located. Through the process of escheats, the property is then taken by the state. If land is needed for a greater public good, they use the government's power of eminent domain, and the taking of the property is done through the court system. Taking of property through the courts is called condemnation, where the property owner must be justly compensated for their property. And then the public or governmental agency that needed that property gets it. Public, governmental, quasi-governmental agency, or public land clearance commissions, or utility companies have the powers of eminent domain.
So government pay for these land?
Whoever it is, whether it's the government, it's a public or governmental agency who has eminent domain powers. If they have a need for the greater good of the public to take your property, they'll take your property through the court system and they have to pay you for it. Yes. But they're not going to pay you because you say, you know, we need that property because we need to put a gas pipeline through it, or we need to put a highway entrance ramp or exit ramp here. So we're going to need to take your property to do so. They may ask just for a piece of the property, and then you're like, well, I want $1 gazillion because you're uber rich, you got deep pockets. They'll be like, no, we're just going to take it. And you're going to get what you get. We're going to have an appraiser come in and appraise it, and whatever the value of the property is, that's what we're going to pay you for it, and then you can move on. You don't got much of a say. Okay. Now you do have a say. You could take them to court and have them have to prove why they need the property and why they need your property in particular. And sometimes these battles can go on a little bit, but do your pockets deep enough to fight City Hall? A lot of people just throw their hands up in the air and just give up right away. So because of that, this is why sometimes these powers are abused by governmental agencies. However, a lot of the time it is needed, but not always. I know in my town, you know, I did a recent thing. I tried to run in the last election for a city council person because I got tired of the way that they were running crap in my town. So damn corrupt. The mayor's corrupt. The council members are corrupt. They do whatever. They're his minions. They do whatever he wants. And they've been taking away properties from private owners to build these luxury high rises all over the damn place. All right. And it's really despicable of how they're getting it done. And this last property that they're building right now in Linden on corner of Wood Avenue and Elizabeth Avenue, right by the train station, there was always a shopping center there. You know, you had laundromats, you had a Carvel ice cream, you had sub shops, you had what was it? It's not a 7-Eleven, but it was another one of those type stores there, Krausers or whatever it is, and basically, you know, anywhere you're near a train station, you get a little element of crime and homelessness and stuff, but the city people that were in charge of taking properties by eminent domain or for developing the properties or what have you, they had a plan in place. And this is devious when you have a plan to do this. They planned on telling the police to let crime go and not really respond to it in that area. What? Isn't that the purpose of our government, to provide safety to us? They're ordering the police just to like ignore crime because they wanted crime to go up in that area. And now, because crime goes up in that area and around that property, they could say, well, this particular property is a problem for the city. It brings in a lot of crime and homelessness and other issues to it. So we're going to take it by eminent domain so that we could redevelop it into something that would be not so much as an eyesore, and it would be a safer place for the city. And it's a better thing overall. It'll bring in more tax dollars and everything. So this is the way that they took a property from an owner who was running a strip mall. They took it by eminent domain using this scheme. And that's what I'm going to call it. It is a scheme. And they told me outright this is what they were doing when I spoke to a couple of the mayor's people who are in charge of this stuff. They weren't shy about it. They just told me outright. They said, yeah, that's how we got that property. And then they just paid them, the owner, for the property, but they took it through eminent domain, and now they're redeveloping it into some luxury high rise again, like we needed another one of them. So the public or governmental agency takes that property, which they did, and then they turned it over to a developer who then reimbursed them whatever costs they needed to get that property. Sounds like a lot of collusion there. Sounds like something illegal, doesn't it? Who's going to look into it? You know, political parties that do not go after each other. It's a shame because they should be representing their constituents, you know, but it goes based off of a lot of times based on political party affiliation. The mayor is the same political party affiliation as others higher up in the government, so therefore they're not going to go after them. They're going to let them do what they want to do there. All right, so then we have non-payment of a debt secured by real property. You don't pay your mortgage loan, you get foreclosed on. Foreclosure is a process of taking a collateralized property put up for collateral for a loan when that loan is not being paid back. So foreclosure in New Jersey is a judicial process. It must go through the court systems. Other states have non-judicial foreclosures. New Jersey, we have judicial foreclosure. It has to go through the court system. And then the property is taken by the sheriff, who then sells it to the highest bidder. And through open, notorious, continuous, hostile, and adverse use of another person's property for a prescribed period of time as prescribed by law, through the process of adverse possession, an easement by prescription can be perfected. However, this requires a court action called a suit for adverse possession, or some people call it a suit to quiet title. Then the adverse possessor gains the ownership, the squatter. So, land could also be transferred without the owner's consent to satisfy debts contracted by one owner. In such cases, the debt is foreclosed, the property is sold, and the proceeds of the sale are applied to pay off the debt. Debts that can be foreclosed include mortgage loans, real estate taxes, construction liens, and general judgments against the property owner. So there you go. If I get a lawsuit against you and I find out you own property, I could take my judgment from the court and I could make it into a lien on the property. And if it doesn't get paid, I could force repayment of that lien through the process of foreclosure. So involuntary alienation also may occur as a result of a court action called a partition proceeding, where one co-owner seeks to force another to divide or sell the property. Once again, that was on page 375 on the second paragraph there. Land may also be transferred by natural forces, by water and wind, which in basically Mother Nature. So it's kind of an involuntary alienation of land by Mother Nature. All right, here's some slides that are way better than the book has, but I'm going to give you a couple of slides right now from chapter 7 and from chapter 7. No, it may be chapter 6. I'm not sure that has this in there. But we're mentioning it here in this chapter as well. So we're going to briefly go over it here, but we're going to majorly go over it in the other chapter. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time answering a bunch of questions on this just yet. So an easement by prescription, by adverse possession. So when somebody's adversely possessed your property, like a squatter, and they've done so out in the open. It's visible. You can see that they're there. They're using the property, but the owner takes no action to get them removed from the property. That squatter can, if they're there long enough, for a long enough period of time as prescribed by law, they can claim ownership of that land, but they have to do so in court. So to perfect this easement by prescription, it requires a court action called a suit for adverse possession. So the use must be continuous, hostile, adverse to the owner's title, exclusive, and without the owner's approval. Additionally, the use must be visible, open, and notorious. It's not like you're putting an underground doggy fence on the property and then you're like, see, I had that fence there all this time. You didn't see it, but you didn't. I was using it. You know, it has to be in the obvious that you're using the property. The prescriptive period in New Jersey is 30 years for improved lands and 60 years for unimproved lands. So what is an improvement? Could be anything, could be a paved road. But if there's no improvements on the land, it's just raw land, the squatter has to use your property for 60 years before they could claim adverse possession. 30 years if there are improvements on the property. Now, these laws are expected to be changed. When? Who the hell knows that whenever our politicians get around to it. I've been tracking this for about 14, 15 years now. Yes, that long. About 14 or 15 years, politicians already know what they want to do to change the law. They're going to do away with, because they found out that there was a court case where one party tried to sue another because they've been using their property for a period of time, over 60 years. However, when they took the other party to court to claim adverse possession and to get the ownership, their argument was, well, there's another law in the books that says in the common law that after 20 years you have to file the suit. So there was a conflict in the law. This 20-year common law says that after 20 years of adverse possession you have to file the suit. But New Jersey politicians in our state created two other laws. One that says if it's improved land, you had to use it for 30 years before you could file the claim. And another one says if it's unimproved lands, you have to use it for 60 years before you can successfully file the claim. So the argument was you didn't file the claim in 20 years like the common law required. So because there was these different laws that conflicted with each other, because politicians, they love making new laws and saying, I passed a law to do this. Who cares if there's a conflict in the law and it caused all kinds of other problems? They don't bother looking to see if there's other laws already on the books that are covering the issue. Instead, they just create new laws. And here's a perfect example of that. And because they did that, now nobody can successfully win a suit for adverse possession in New Jersey until these laws are cleared up. See, if a judge just ruled on this case when it came about, he would be what we call legislating from the bench, basically creating a de facto law, a legal standard by passing a judgment. But that's not the judge's job. When there are conflicts in the law, they're supposed to throw it back to the politicians to fix the broken law that either doesn't cover an issue or where there's a conflict because they created too many rules. Because the judge's job is to rule based on the law. But if there are multiple rules covering the same topic, it is not the judge's job to determine which is the right rule to follow. Like if there was no rule on a particular issue, there was no law on a particular issue, the judge is not supposed to make a ruling on that either, because that could create problems. Basically, the judge became a lawmaker now because they're creating a standard. Kind of like the issue that we saw, what, a year or two ago about the whole abortion thing. What was it, the Roe versus Wade? You guys remember that? That was a big thing in the news. 50 years ago, a judge ruled on a case that allowed this lady who claimed that she needed an abortion because she was raped. So the judge created a law by saying, okay, we're allowing you to get the abortion. Basically, they created a standard, and a lot of people's eyes, they saw that as a law that allows abortion, that makes it legal. But the thing is, judges are not allowed to make laws. And it was never questioned. You always saw the politicians out there wagging their fingers. You got to watch out for them Republicans. They're trying to take away your rights that are written into law for a long standing. Really? Who wrote it into law? Nobody wrote it into law. There was never a politician that ruled on it. They had opportunities plenty of times. How come they never made a law about it? Well, because hot button topics are good for politicians every election year to bring up, to fire you up, to fire up their base who's passionate about these issues so that they could vote on them and against the other party. You know, this is the way that politics is dirty. You know, it's cheap in that way. Basically, politicians without a backbone or spine, they don't create a law so that they could use it as a hot button issue to play you every year when it comes to election time to get you to vote for them. In the meantime, they could really care less about your issue, you know, the issue at hand. So for the first time in 50 years since this one judge ruled on something, they took it to court all the way to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, yeah, there was no law on this. This judge did not have the authority to rule on this. So we're going to undo what he made as a precedent for the law. It is not a law. Now, they didn't create a law either, because that's not the Supreme Court's job either. It's the politicians' jobs, which they still did not create a law over. And they were in power. They had the presidency, the House, and the Senate, and they never did anything to create this law that they're so advocating, right? So now they left it in the powers of the states, each individual state, to create their own laws. So the whole thing about the Supreme Court changing laws or whatever, that's nonsense too. But this just goes to show you how big of a mess can be made when a judge decides to make rulings from benches that create laws. So in New Jersey, nobody's going to be able to claim adverse possession until this is cleared up. And as long as I've been following it, I think it's on 15 years now, maybe even 16. I got to really check again. They know what they want to do. They're going to do away with the 30-year and the 60-year law and replace it with a 20-year common law. And if I recall right, because this was quite a few years ago that I read this, they also wanted to make a new law about when tidal waters recede and then they dry up, who can claim that land? Can it be attached to the neighboring property and then becomes their land? Or who gets the ownership of that water, that land that was once underwater? Okay. I forget the time frame on it. I think it had to have been dry for 40 years before anybody can claim ownership of that land. And then the neighboring property will become the owner of it. So they already know what they want to do. They put these things into documents. They just haven't voted on it yet. For like between 14 and 16 years now, as far as I've been following it. All right. So for exams, though, the books have been confused, because if you look at the last few versions of these books, they were saying that the prescriptive period is 20 years. Then other ones were saying it's 30 years for improved land, 60 years for unimproved land, but the law suggests that a 20-year period may be possible. You know, it's like it was all confusing. You know, it seems like the people who write these books didn't even know what the New Jersey law is, I guess because they didn't read it and weren't as close intimately involved in it as I've been following this for years. So I even contacted the Real Estate Commission about this on their exams, hoping that their exams are not following the proposed law, like a lot of the book manufacturers have then changed over to suggesting that the 20-year period law is the law now, when it's not. It's what it's going to be. I guess they assumed that by now they should have made it law, so they even wrote it into their versions of the book. So for exams, what do you need to know? Are you paying attention now? For exams, what do you need to know? 30 years for improved lands and 60 years for unimproved lands. Don't worry about that 20-year common law period because they didn't change the law yet. So as far as what's on the books right now that we need to study, because it used to be on the exams, 30 years for improved lands, 60 years for unimproved lands is the prescriptive period in order to claim adverse possession. Everybody follow me? Everybody knows what I'm talking about right now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So you need to know these time frames for exam. They will ask you questions about easement by prescription, what the time frame is that you need to use that land for before you could claim adverse possession. What do we call that lawsuit? It's either a suit for adverse possession or a suit to quiet title in order to perfect the claim of adverse possession. Now, in the past, these laws were normally created so that land is being fully utilized. It was mainly put into place to deal with farmland, but it really deals with all property because the government wants to make sure that all property out there that's available for public use is being fully utilized. And most importantly, tax dollars are being paid on them. All right, so through the process of tacking, you as an individual squatter didn't have to be the only one that squatted there. Through the process of tacking, successors in interest, like a landlord and a tenant, an ancestor and an heir, or a seller and a buyer, can add on one person's time of possession onto another, combining them to reach a prescriptive period. So, how could you prevent somebody from claiming an easement by prescription? Well, an owner can take legal action against any adverse possessor to get them removed from the land. They could cut off their access, putting up signs, putting up a fence. This basically resets the time clock for them to get that adverse possession period, or it's required to make the claim. Or they could give them permission to be on their land. You can't claim adverse possession when you have permission to be on the property. You can't claim adverse possession to take ownership when somebody's given you permission to be on their land. And lastly, an easement by prescription can never be claimed against publicly owned property, only by private ownership. All right, so adverse possession. Let's see. This is on page 375. Let's do these highlights under adverse possession. And let me know when you got them all done. But there is one additional interesting thing here. Property owners who feel government requirements or restrictions have taken away their rights on how they could use or develop their own land because of all the governmental red tape. They say, oh, there's these environmental laws you need to follow now. Oh, there's these zoning restrictions and rules that dictate the size of your property, the setback, this, that, and the other thing. The government creates so many laws, rules, and regulations that it basically makes it impossible for you to develop your land. They basically are devaluing the land because of how it can no longer be used. You are suffering from what's known as inverse condemnation. They didn't directly condemn your property. However, they did, by all the red tape and regulations and rules that they created around it, they rendered your property worthless. So because of this, the property owner can actually sue the government for the lost value due to all of their rules that they put into place that restricted their property so much. You're not going to get this on exam. But for me, this was helpful twice in my real estate career so far, knowing this. And not in my real estate career, also on the political spectrum, this also helped me out a little bit with a problem. It's known as inverse condemnation. So the burden is on the owners who have to prove that the government's actions have taken their property rights away without justly compensating them for that. It shouldn't be too hard to do. Okay, so do all these highlights here and let me know when you're done, and I'll change the slide.
Done. I'm done.
Anybody still highlighting?
No.
So now this is what we're going to go over in chapter 6. So you don't got to highlight it now. You don't got to turn to chapter 6 and highlight it. When we go back to chapter 6 after this chapter, we'll highlight it then. Because we did the segue from chapter 5, we came to this chapter, then we're going back to chapter 6. So an easement by prescription is when someone has used another person's land for a certain period of time as defined by state law. An easement by prescription may be claimed. The claimant's use must have been continuous, hostile, adverse, and owners to the owner's title, and exclusive without the owner's approval. Additionally, the use must be visible, open, and notorious. Now, none of these claims are actually written into the law that require that to claim adverse possession. However, those are the requirements in order to successfully win an adverse possession claim. So in New Jersey, the law is silent as to the required number of years, although court cases appear to support. This just shows you that the book manufacturers, whoever are writing the rule here, they don't know what the hell's going on through their research because they haven't been following it as long as I have. It's been a long thing. The law is not silent. The politicians know that they're going to be changing the law to a 20-year common law and do away with the 30 and 60-year period, like it has been used for years in New Jersey. So that's why they say court cases appear to support a minimum of 30 years of adverse use and 60 if the property is considered woodlands or vacant properties. That's the way that they used to have it before somebody brought up the 20-year common law and then it became an issue. So that's why they're saying that. So we're going to just still study the 30 and the 60-year periods for exams. Now, an owner can halt the process by specifically granting permission for the use or by cutting off the continuous use or take legal action to remove someone. Through tacking. Okay, we already went over that. Legal action must be taken to perfect the easement, and it's called a suit for adverse possession or to quiet title. So, how do we transfer the property of a deceased person? Well, title is a word that means ownership. No document in real estate called a title. Deed is a document that transfers that ownership, the title, during a person's lifetime. How do we transfer the title after someone dies? By their wishes in a last will and testament. Hopefully they had a will. Otherwise, who gets it? I guess natural blood relatives and heirs can lay claim to it. If they don't step forward, then who gets it?
The government?
The government gets it. So transfer of title by will is known as devise. The devisor is a person who is leaving you the property in a will. Devisee is the one who's named in a will to receive the property, and they don't need to be a relative. It's just somebody who you name in a will that you want to get the property. You can leave it to anyone you want. They don't need to be a relative. It's just when you die without a will, relatives are the only ones that can claim it. Natural blood relatives are the only ones that could claim it, or adopted children, only from their adopting parents, not the ancestors of their adopting parents. Testate or devise is having prepared a will stating how to dispose of your assets after death. And a will has no power until after you die. Because how do you transfer property ownership while you're alive? How do you transfer property ownership while you're alive?
With a testament?
With a deed. The deed is the document to transfer ownership.
Okay.
The will, the last will and testament, is used to transfer it while after you die. So, testate is having prepared a will stating how to dispose of your assets after death. And the will has no power until after you die. See that? So transfer of title by descent takes effect only when you die. Every state has their own laws of descent and distribution specifying who can inherit your assets upon your death when you die intestate. What does that mean? It means you have not prepared a will. And therefore it is involuntary because you do not get to decide who gets your stuff after you die. So consult an attorney about making a will and your options. Even though I tell you guys right now, grab a blank piece of paper and start writing on there who you want to get all your crap. Okay? Because if you die tomorrow, the state's going to decide that for you. Or your relatives, your blood relatives can fight it out. But they're still going to have to, even though they rightfully have a claim to it, it's still going to need to go through probate, and the court's going to need to make sure of that. And because there was nobody that you named to administer your will, the state's going to hire somebody to do that position, which will be an attorney, that to administer your estate. All right, so intestate, let's highlight on page 375. Intestate, without having left a will. Testate has prepared a will. This sentence here says legally when a person dies, their real estate immediately passes to their heirs by descent or the person who named in a will. However, the will must be probated and all claims against the estate must be satisfied. What do you call the person named in a will to get your stuff? Using this new terminology that we're learning.
The testate.
No, testate means you died with a will. Testate, here, you prepared a will. So legally, when a person dies, title to their real estate immediately passes to their heirs by descent or to a person named in the will. What do you call a person named in a will?
Devisee.
A devisee. There you go. That's what I was looking for. Thank you. However, the will must be probated and all claims against the estate must be satisfied. What does that mean? Well, I put a little note here, meaning all debts must be paid, especially any unpaid taxes or claims from creditors. So probate or administration is a legal process in which a court determines who inherits the property of a deceased person and what the assets of the estate are. Either an executor, a man, or an executrix, a woman, named in the will, or an administrator named by the court, if there was no executor or executrix named and you had no valid will, would oversee the administration and distribution of the estates. Do you have the highlights and the notes?
Writing the note.
Okay.
You're done.
Yes.
Just let me know when you guys got it all.
Got it.
Anybody still writing or has everybody got it?
It's your writing.
Okay, let me know when you got it.
Okay. Got it. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else want me to wait, or can I change the slide?
You can change it.
Okay, thank you. So once again, here in chapter 20, we have this definitions sheet that I had in chapter 5 as these death terms. So as we're going over them now, it makes maybe a little more sense. An heir is any natural blood relative who can inherit your belongings and lay claim to them because they're a blood relative. Look, some of these laws may seem a little medieval to you. They're like kind of outdated from medieval times, but well, they are old, long-standing laws and rules. All right. Some of them may seem kind of harsh the way they're written because these days people, you know, they're like, oh, that's not right. Oh, that doesn't sound right. Oh, you should have more empathy and all that stuff. Well, you know, there used to be a time where people didn't just take in other people's kids and adopt them, you know. But when they did, does that mean that they have rights to not just the adopted family stuff when they die, but do they have rights to the ancestors of that adopted family? This is what we're going to go over. So, devise is to transfer or leave property by will upon death in your last will and testament. Devisor is the one who's leaving you that property in their will. Devisee is the one named in the will to get that property. Demise is a transfer of property by lease, not to be confused with devise, which is the transfer of property by will. Testate means you made a will. Intestate means you did not. Testator is a man who makes a will. Testatrix is a female who does. Probate is that court proceeding that determines who the rightful heir, natural blood relative heirs are that can lay claim if there was no will to your assets. Or devisees are named in that will to get the property. And the probate proceeding just confirms who the devisees are and that they were named in the will. And whether you had a will or not, probate process wants to make sure that all your debts have been paid, like your taxes. And it also gives the opportunity for anybody else you owed money to step forward and be like, yo, that dude was a deadbeat and he owed me money. So you have the opportunity to claim your money there. Descent and distribution. Every law has the laws of descent and distribution, which we are still to go over in detail here. Descent and distribution is the law that determines who your natural heirs are who can get your assets if you die in testates. And if there are none around and none make a claim and you didn't have a will because you died intestate, who gets it? The state does. So therefore now it rolls into escheat. So escheat is when you die intestate and no heirs can be located, the property reverts to the state. So the property is sold at auction and the money is held in a fund for 1 year, in which time natural heirs can step forward and make claim to it. If nobody steps forward to claim it, then the state gets your money. You know, this is one of my first jobs as a teenager. I mean, I had jobs as a younger kid, you know, sweeping up a bus station repair shop, bus depot, and some other jobs, you know, before I was old enough to actually have a job, you know. I still wanted to work as a kid and I was pretty eager. So I went out and got my own jobs and stuff for businesses around the corner. They paid me some money to do some stuff, but, you know, I was an enterprising kid. And then, you know, when I was a teenager, you know, I was big into I liked working with my hands, taking stuff apart and tinkering and fixing stuff up, you know. So I was big into the electronics magazines and such, and in the back of all these science magazines and things, there used to be a lot of ads in there. There was one ad there about you know, how to make money by becoming a skip tracer, they called it. These days, I guess a skip tracer is more like a private investigator, but essentially that's what I was. Um, Except didn't require any license. You know, you're basically, your job is to track people down and get them back in touch with the money that is rightfully due to them. So you could, for a fee, you could mail in to the government. You could mail in, and they would tell you how many, you could buy so many leads of people that are owed money. And it'll give you all the information that the government possessed on them. They would take it off of reel-to-reel tapes. This is the way their big mainframe computers used to work back then. They would take it off of reel-to-reel tapes and put it on a floppy disk and mail it to you. Yeah, I know computers don't have floppy disks anymore. 1.44 megabit of data you could fit on one, which was a massive amount back then. And then basically my job was to try to track down these people and get them back in touch with their money. You know, they gave me all the forms and everything I needed in order to mediate with the government and to contact people that let them know that money was owed. And basically it was basically this stuff, things of this nature. When the government owed money due to various things back to people, they were holding on to money that was owed to people. They don't try to track you down and reunite you with your money. They basically hold on to it, and if you don't claim it, they get to keep it. So they're not doing a crazy job trying to reach out to you too hard. All right. And it's amazing because there are billions of dollars owed back to people every year. So anyway, that was one of my first jobs. So so escheat is when the state takes that property, they sell it, and then they keep the money if nobody steps forward in a year to claim it. So that was my job, is to reach out to those people and get them in touch with their money, let them know that it was due to them. And you know, when they agreed to share a percentage of it with me, then I would go through the paperwork with them to claim it, to get it, and then I'd earn my money. That, in some areas, I thought that was actually made illegal in New Jersey. It was made illegal in some states, but not in New Jersey. Well, to a certain point. There's certain rules you got to follow now. So I could have still kept in that business. I probably would have been very successful in it too, but I did not. I moved on. But there's a business idea for people if they want it. Legacy or bequest is a gift of personal property after death. It's what you left behind. I bequeath to thee my vast fortune of $4 in my bank accounts, or my precious fake jewelry. Dower or courtesy are the rights of a husband and wife, or wife and husband in this case, in this order, that your spouse has a right to interest of half of everything that you own during your lifetime while you're married. So dower begins with a doe and a doe, even though that's spelled D-O-E. A doe is a deer, a female deer. So that's how I remember that dower is the wife's right. And courtesy, because men should be courteous to women, is the man's right, the husband's right. Now, don't even mention gay marriage now. That's legal in New Jersey because Governor Christie signed it into law several years ago, back when he was governor. Gay marriage did not exist back then, so that was not an issue. And dower and courtesy rights did not exist, creating of any new ones once gay marriage was made legal, because that was May 28, 1980, where they did away with dower and courtesy rights. So that it is specific to husband and wife. So dower is a right of an ancient right in which the wife has certain interest upon her husband's death in any real estate that he owned during their marriage. Courtesy is a similar right that the husband has in the property the wife owned during their marriage. Specifically, property in New Jersey. Other states would have to honor this or not, or you'd have to go by the laws of their state if there was property owned in different states, but this is pertaining to property that's owned in New Jersey. New Jersey abolished the creation of any new dower or courtesy rights as of May 28, 1980. Marriages after this date, the spouse only has the rights of interest in the primary marital residence, and of course anything you left them specifically in a will. You know. So if you left the other stuff to your girlfriend instead of your wife, well, it's a joke. Okay, so missingmoney.com is run by the federal government. New Jersey used to be a part of it, but they pulled out of it. They no longer put their stuff in that website. However, other states do. And unclaimed, New Jersey instead created their own version of that, the unclaimedproperty.nj.gov, where you could check and see if your name or family or relatives' names are in there. I told you guys about this earlier during lunch. Has anybody searched these websites yet to see if they name or family relatives or anybody came up in there?
No, I went into the website, but I didn't type anything in yet.
Okay, so look, I'm going to go to unclaimed property. There you go. Unclaimed property. Here's the page that you come up to. And you could search. You see his claims? Search for unclaimed property. You put in your name, last name, first name. You could put in your city, but the more info you put in there, the less likelihood. Look, this could have been property elsewhere, or depending on how the data was submitted to the system. I'd probably leave this stuff blank and just put in your name, your last name, and then the first name, unless you got a very common last name. And then start searching through the records, sifting through them. See if you got any relatives that come up there. And see, even here it says to search for property held by other states, visit missingmoney.com. And if you did not find any expected results, click here. You could have somebody else do a search for you and pay them $10. Our site does not, our site does not display small properties under $10. Money orders, cashier's check, gift cards are often reported with no names at all. If you have resided outside of New Jersey, funds may be located in another state. Go to unclaimed.org. There's another site for you. Okay, so unclaimed.org is another site. Look at that. Open that up. Yeah, from the National Association of Unclaimed Property Administrators. Okay. And this is New Jersey's Unclaimed Property Administrator. They got some videos on what is unclaimed property, claiming property, the holders report, and all that stuff. But what is unclaimed property?
Thank you for calling.
Building your online business?
Let's see. Skip that.
Property Administration. Doug speaking. How may I help you?
Hi, I just stopped by my bank to transfer some money from a savings account I had forgotten about, and the bank said you have the funds. Is there any way I can get it back?
Of course you can. It's your money. Banks sometimes send funds to New Jersey because they're considered abandoned under New Jersey unclaimed property laws.
Really? What are unclaimed property laws?
Unclaimed property laws work to protect consumers. Before these laws existed, banks and corporations would just absorb abandoned bank accounts and uncashed checks. Now the law requires businesses to turn this property over to the state for safekeeping. Even better, the state will return the property to its rightful owner with whatever interest accrued while the property was held.
Well, how much time do I have to get the money back? Is there a limit to how long the state holds the property?
No, the state never takes ownership of that property, and you never relinquish ownership. Property that
Except for real estate. That is not true.
is not claimed remains in the Unclaimed Property Trust Fund in perpetuity until its owner is found.
So how does the state find the owners?
Lots of ways. We advertise newly received unclaimed property in newspapers throughout the state. We also have an outreach team that attends public events year-round. On top of all that, we have a property search and claim submission application on our website. This application can be used to locate property, submit claims, check the status of your claim, and upload any required verification documentation.
This application is on your website? So I can start getting my money back right now?
Yes, you can. Head over to unclaimedproperty.nj.gov. Once you get to our site, select the Search for Unclaimed Property link. If you locate property in your name, follow the instructions for creating an account and submitting a claim. This is the quickest way to get your money back.
Yeah? But what if I can't find my property on the site? What do I do then?
If you can't find unclaimed property on our online search site, select the Claim Process link on our homepage. That page has a Request Property Search link. This link will take you to the Search Request tool where you can provide your information along with any property-specific details of what you're looking for. After submitting this information, a UPA customer service representative will conduct a thorough system search for any property and will notify you of the results.
Well, I better get started. Thanks for your help.
No problem. Call us back if you run into any issues.
Telling you guys, money's out there. You just got to claim it. All right. So a last will and testament is an instrument made by an owner to voluntarily convey title to the owner's property after their death. The testator or testatrix is the one who makes the will. Gift of real property is known as divine. Now, in New Jersey, children can be disinherited, so be good to your parents for crying out loud, but that shouldn't be the reason for you to be good to your parents for crying out loud, right? So New Jersey children can be disinherited, but a surviving spouse is entitled to at least 1/3 of the estate. And the determination of the augmented estate is a complex calculation. In cases where a will does not provide the minimum statutory inheritance, the surviving spouse has the option of informing the court that they're going to take the statutory share rather than any lesser share that may have been provided for in the will. So basically, if your spouse who passed away left you less than the required minimum that they were required to leave to you by law, they don't have to leave for you that required minimum. They could leave you less. It's up to you to know the law and be like, well, they were required to leave me at least 1/3 of their estate. Instead, they left me less. So you can say, nah, I'm not going to take that lesser amount. Instead, I'm going to exercise my right of election, which is reserved only for a surviving spouse, to get the higher 1/3 share amount rather than the lesser amount that may have been provided for in the will. So a will differs from a deed because deeds are used to transfer your ownership while you're alive, and wills are used to transfer that ownership, dictating who gets it after you die. So to be valid, deeds must be delivered during the lifetime of the grantor. You will get some kind of question on exam about that. You have to know that. The deeds need to be signed by the grantee, the buyer, in order for them to be valid. Do deeds need to be signed by the buyer, the grantee?
Yes, they had to.
They need to be signed by the grantor, the seller, but not by the buyer, and they're still valid.
Oh,
So as long as the seller has your name listed in the deed and they're the rightful seller, and the seller signs the deed, they don't need to be dated or signed by the grantee, the buyer. The moment you accept that deed, upon delivery and acceptance of the deed itself, you now became the owner. You didn't need to sign it. You didn't need to date it. The moment you accepted that deed, you became the owner of the property. However, you need to sign that deed and your signature needs to be notarized or acknowledged before you can record the deed in the public records. All right. In chapter 7, we're going to have on page 120, we're going to have a whole form there. I'm going to show you. It basically says remembering legal terms, words that end in OR versus words that end in EE that talk about this. So you may want to write in your book there on page 376, see page 120, remembering legal terms, OR versus EE. So do these highlights and write this note here on the side and let me know when you're done with that. And while you take those notes, I'm just going to pause the recording here for a moment. Back. Okay, so sorry about that. Continuing on with this. Everybody got these notes, so then we're going to go on to here. In chapter 7, we're going to have this page that we're going to write these notes here for remembering legal terminology, OR versus EE. Words that end in OR are the one that's giving the product or the root word, whatever the root word is about. And the words that end in EE is the one that's receiving it. So it makes it easier to remember legal terms. But you got to know what the root word means. Devise is when you die without a will. When you leave a property by will upon death. Devise is that leaving a property in a will. So the devisor is the one that's giving that property. The devisee is the one that's receiving it. Grant is how we transfer ownership of real estate. You're granting your ownership to someone else. So the grantor is the one who's giving that property or selling it, and the grantee is the one that's receiving it. Legacy is the personal property, and the legator is the one who's giving it, and the legatee is the one that's receiving it. That legacy that you've amassed during your lifetime of your personal property. A lease is where an owner intentionally transfers their physical property and all their rights to it for a limited period of time to a tenant for a limited period of time as defined in the lease. So the lessor is the one that's giving those rights. That's the landlord. They're the one that gives you the lease. And the lessee is the tenant, the one that receives it. See, doesn't that make it so much easier to remember who the characters are? OR is the one that's giving. EE is the one that's getting it. Who gives a lease? The landlord. So the landlord is the lessor and the tenant is the lessee. Mortgage is the one they got a little asterisk here because it's the opposite of what you think it is. It's not a loan. Mortgage is a promise to pay. And banks don't make promises, they make loans. So the mortgagor is the borrower. They're the one that's making their promise and giving it to the bank if the bank gives them a loan in return. So the mortgagor is the borrower. So sing it. So this way you don't need to remember that whole story about a mortgage is a promise to pay and banks don't make promises, they make loans. It's the borrower that makes the promise. In exchange, the bank gives them a loan. That's a lot to remember. I like the KISS concept. Keep it simple, stupid. So simple that I don't have to think. It's simple, stupid. So a mortgage is a promise to pay, and the mortgagor is the borrower. I like to sing it because it makes me remember it that way because it rhymes, right? Now, the other one, mortgagee and lender, no rhyme there. You can't really sing that one, right? So the mortgagor is the borrower. Trust me, my annoying voice will be stuck in your head when you're taking exams and you see the word mortgagor. You're going to be like, who's the mortgagor? The borrower. Oh. And you're going to chuckle while taking the exam because you're going to remember me. All right. And so on and so forth. Okay, these are easier ways to remember these legal terms. So What are the legal requirements of making a will? I told you I took a poll and nobody here in this class actually has a will. So how do you put one together? Well, contact an attorney, probably the best way. Or you can get one of those softwares that are legal in all 50 states for putting together a will. As long as they're clear on how to do it, you know, an attorney may be able to give you some guidelines on that a little bit. Or you could get like Susie Orman's Will Maker or Quicken Will Maker, and they walk you through the process. The software walks you through the process of creating a will. Okay. Other way, if the will is printed out, then it needs to be signed, and you need to have 2 witnesses. And those witnesses' signatures should be, notarized. If you have a completely handwritten will, requires no witnesses, because it may be easy to forge a signature, but not an entire document. Nobody's that good. So that's why a completely handwritten document called a holographic will is legal without any witnesses. So a person must be of legal age and sound mind when they execute the will. That means they signed it. The drawing of the will must be a voluntary act free of any undue influence by other people. Any person of sound mind who's 18 years of age or older can make a will devising their real property. All wills must be in writing to be valid. So those videotaped wills or audio wills, not legal in New Jersey. You can make them as long as they're not, as long as they go along with your written will. You could sit there reading your written will to people and make the comments so that they could see you one last time, and you could tell somebody to kiss your butt if you didn't like them or whatever, you know. But you know, these wills need to be in writing in order to be valid according to New Jersey law. The general rule is that a will must be witnessed by 2 persons. A beneficiary may serve as a witness in New Jersey, and if the signatures of the witnesses are notarized within 2 days, probate proceedings can be simplified. The holographic will is a completely handwritten will that must be signed and dated by the person making it, the testator. Under New Jersey law, estate planning law, a holographic will can be probated and will serve to ensure that the testator's assets are bequeathed according to their wishes. For real property acquired by a married deceased person before May 28, 1980, the surviving spouse is entitled to a life estate of 1/2 interest in all real estate owned by the deceased, no matter what other provisions were made for in the will. This is your dower and courtesy rights. Now, dower and courtesy rights, the creation of any new dower or courtesy rights were abolished in New Jersey as of May 28, 1980. Now, anybody that may have been married before May 28, 1980 still does have dower and courtesy rights. Dower is the wife's right in the husband's estate for all the property that he owned during their lifetime, and marriage. Courtesy is a similar right, because men should be courteous to women. That's the man's right. That does the same. They have a right and interest in all their wife's property that they own during their marriage and lifetime. Now, keep in mind, don't take any legal advice from me or anything on this. Make sure you talk to an attorney about anything. However, nothing I say here is to be construed as legal advice for anybody. But this is stuff that we need to know for the real estate classes, because I'm teaching a real estate class right now to you, and these are the terms you need to know and how the process works. So, transfer of title by descent. What is descent? Well, every state has their own laws of descent and distribution that dictates how your property is going to be distributed when you die intestate. That means without a will. So title to real estate and personal property of a person who dies intestate normally passes on to their heirs. That's their blood relatives. Under the descent statutes, the primary heirs of a deceased are their spouse, civil partner, or domestic partner, and close blood relatives. When children have been legally adopted, most states consider them to be heirs of the adopting parents, but not heirs of the ancestors of the adopting parents. So the aunts, uncles, and cousins, you cannot claim to be an heir to them because technically, even though you're adopted, you're not their family. You're not their blood relatives. You cannot lay claim to their rights. Like if we watch some of these shows from medieval times, you can't claim the throne because you're not a part of the bloodline. We took you in and adopted you, but you're not part of the bloodline, so you can't lay claim to their assets. Now, if they wanted to, they could leave them to you in a will, but you can't claim them if they didn't. In most states, illegitimate children. Oh, what's an illegitimate child? Anybody know? An illegitimate child is one that is born out of wedlock, meaning that your parents were not married when you were born. So in Game of Thrones terminology, so a lot of the younger crowd can understand it a little better, you are the bastard child. Okay, not meaning to be rude to anybody or anything. I'm just trying to make jokes here and, using Game of Thrones as the example for that, so don't get offended by anything. In most states, this is how harsh this is how medieval these laws are. They are old laws, and they haven't been revisited or updated or terminology updated in them. This is how it's written. Illegitimate children. Well, how can a child be illegitimate? Well, the parents weren't married when the child was conceived or born, rather. So in most states, illegitimate children inherit from the mother, but they do not inherit from the father. Wow, isn't that messed up? If your parents were not married, like you're their blood child, you're not even the adopted child, you're a blood child of your parents. You could claim to inherit from your mother, but not from your father, unless he admitted that he's your parent, or you proved it in some other way. So unless he has admitted parentage or in writing, or parentage has been established legally in some other form, like a blood test or something, you can't claim to be an heir from your father's side. It's kind of messed up, ain't it? So if he legally adopts you, that child inherits as an adopted child would from the parents, but not the ancestors of the parents, which is pretty messed up because you're a natural blood relative. And this is all stemming from your parents not being married when you were born. Huh. Interesting. I wonder if somebody checks on that really. Because that's the law. All right, now what happens when you die? When you die intestate, real property is distributed according to the laws of descent and distribution, right? So, according to the intestate, real property is distributed according to the laws of the state where the property is located. New Jersey law of descent and distribution provides real property belonging to an individual who's died intestate is distributed in the following order. Now, this law and the estate is discussed only, these rules only apply when to what remains after all debts have been paid, after all your taxes and debts have been paid for any claims that may have been made against that estate. How is the rest of the stuff distributed? Well, the laws of descent come into effect once again only if you die intestate without a will. A surviving spouse or partner becomes the sole heir if the descendant leaves no parents or children. If there is a child or children who are also the children of the surviving spouse, the spouse or partner receives the first $50,000 plus 1/2 the remaining estate. The rest goes to the child or children. If the descendant leaves parents and a spouse, but no children, the spouse or partner receives the first $50,000 plus 1/2 the remaining estate. The rest goes to the parent or parents. If there are children who are not the children of the surviving spouse, the spouse or partner receives half the estate, the child or children the other half. Where there's no spouse or partner that survives, children become sole natural heirs. And where there's neither a surviving spouse nor children or children's own heirs, the estate first goes to parents, and failing that, to brothers and sisters or their heirs. In default of any other natural heir, grandparents, aunts, uncles, and first cousins may be considered heirs. Beyond that point, the entire estate goes to the state of New Jersey by escheat. So what is escheat and how does that work? Well, the state treasurer sells the property at a public auction, giving notice by publicizing it in a newspaper in Trenton and the major newspaper in the county where the property is located. The proceeds from that sale are held in a fund for 1 year, and if no claims are made within the year, the funds belong to the state. So go to unclaimedproperty.nj.gov to see if you have any real estate that's owed to you there. Even though there on that website they tell you that the state of New Jersey does not take any property if it's not claimed within a certain time, well, that is not completely true. If you die without any heirs, they do so in this process, okay? Missingmoney.com is a website that New Jersey no longer participates in, but other states do. So you could use that as a resource as well as New Jersey's Missing Money website. We just seen that they also have, where is it? They also told you that you could go to unclaimed.org, which is the National Association of Unclaimed Property Administrators, so you could search for your property across the entire United States. Look at that. $4.5 billion returned to people last year. So you can see what the different states that participate in this. And this is missingmoney.com. Isn't that amazing? New Jersey got their own. All right. And that ends chapter 20. So let's do the key terms to review for chapter 20. Are you guys ready?
Give me 1 second, please.
All right. Now, while we give her 1 second, on page 378, where we have the key terms to review for chapter 20, go down to the letter the letter L, where it says one person can inherit, and right after that, blood relatives. And on the left-hand side, next to number 5, where it says executor, put a slash there and write executrix, EXECUTRIX. Executrix, just like it sounds, EXECUTRIX.
Okay, I'm ready. Thank you.
Okay. And then go down to letter 12, or number 12, and where it says testator, put a slash and write testatrix, TEST, the letter A, TRIX, tricks. Okay, so let's get started. I'm going to read out the answer on the phrase on the right-hand side of the page. You guys are going to shout out what you think the corresponding answer is on the left-hand side. There's no penalties for wrong answers, so shout them out as you got them. Are you ready? I said, are you ready?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Person named by the state to administer a descendant's will. Person named by the state to administer a descendant's will?
Administrator.
One is A, an administrator is correct. Court proceeding to establish validity of a will.
Probate.
It is probate.
Probate.
B, correct. Title acquired by usage. Title meaning ownership, acquired by
Yes.
using someone's property. What do we call that?
Adverse possession.
It is.
Oh,
2 is C, adverse possession.
the title acquired by usage. Oh, but that is adverse possession is taking over the land, right? Does it mean the same?
When you're using someone's property,
Title acquired by
we call them a
usage.
squatter, right?
Okay.
If you're using someone else's property, you're a squatter. And if you've been using
Right.
somebody's property without their permission for a long enough period of time as defined by law, you can become the owner, but you got to take them to court. This is known as adverse possession. However, in order to perfect a suit for adverse possession, you do need to take them to court. So it is adverse possession, though. So title acquired by usage, that's adverse possession. 2 is C. Person named in a will to administer a descendant's estate. Somebody who you chose that you named in your will.
Executor.
An
Executor.
executor or
Executrix.
executrix. 5 is D, correct. Transfer of title without the grantor's consent.
Involuntary alienation.
Yes, 8 is E, involuntary alienation. 8 is E. Without a will. Without having
Intestate.
prepared a will. It is in.
Intestate.
7 is F. One who makes a will.
Testate. Oh, one who makes a will. Sorry.
You call the
One who
person
makes a
who makes
will.
a will.
Testator.
Testator or testatrix if they're a female. Correct. 12 is G. Document disposing of property after one's death. What is the document that states how to dispose of your property after you die?
Last will and testament.
Last will and testament.
Last will and testament. 9 is H. Having made a will.
Testate.
Testate. Testate means that you made a will. You died testate. You made a will. 11 is I. Acquiring of property by natural heirs, by your natural blood relatives. What is that called? How do we trace who's entitled to that? We just read the whole steps about it.
Descent.
Descent. 3 is
Descent. Right.
Yep.
Descent.
descent and distribution. So your descendants, right? Who gets your stuff? Descent and distribution. 3 is J. One who receives real property through a will.
Devisee.
A devisee. 4 is K. Very good. Some people would say an heir. An heir is not someone you name in a will. An heir is a natural blood relative. A devisee is somebody that you name in a will. So correct. One who receives property through, I let that cat out of the bag, didn't I? One who receives real property through a will.
Heir.
That's the devisee. 4 is K.
Heir.
One who can inherit those blood relatives.
Heir.
Heir. 6 is L. And transfer of title with the grantor's consent.
Voluntary.
Voluntary alienation. Correctamundo. So that's the end of chapter 20.